The year 1303 BC began for me at Nile Delta in the quiet of an unremarkable household. I remember river reeds most clearly, the world soft and unhurried around me, the days unfolding slowly. You need not follow every word that follows. Let your eyes close whenever they wish, and simply rest here with me as the story unfolds. The air held the heavy, sweet scent of wet earth and blooming lotus, a fragrance that clung to the linen curtains drawn against the midday heat. My mother sat nearby, her hands busy with the rhythmic weaving of a simple mat, the sound of the fibers rubbing together a gentle, steady beat that marked the passage of time. She spoke little, her voice a low hum that blended with the distant call of the ibis and the soft lap of water against the mud brick walls. There was no urgency in those days, no great wars or towering monuments to build, only the slow, deliberate work of living within the shadow of the great river. The light filtered through the reed mats in thin, golden strips, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air like tiny, floating stars. I watched them drift and settle, feeling a profound sense of safety in the predictability of their movement. The heat of the sun outside was a distant thing, held at bay by the thick walls and the cool dampness of the floor beneath my small feet. My father walked past the doorway occasionally, his sandals making a soft, rhythmic sound on the packed earth, a sound that signaled his presence without demanding attention. He carried the weight of a growing family and a kingdom that stretched from the delta to the southern cataracts, yet in this small room he was simply a man returning to the shade. The smell of baking bread drifted in from the courtyard, mixing with the scent of drying fish and the faint, metallic tang of the river water. It was a complex perfume of daily life, one that grounded me in the reality of the present moment. I remember the texture of the clay cup I held, rough and warm from the sun, filled with water that tasted faintly of the silt it had traveled through. My mother would sometimes point out the shapes of the clouds as they moved across the vast blue sky, telling stories of the gods who rode upon them, but I preferred to watch the shadows lengthen on the opposite wall. The day moved with a deliberate slowness, each hour stretching out like the river itself, filling the space with a quiet, unbroken continuity. There was a specific fact that the scribes would later record, noting that the average lifespan of a commoner in this era rarely exceeded 30 years, yet in that small room, time felt infinite and unbounded by such limitations. The afternoon sun shifted, casting a new pattern of light across the floor, and the room seemed to breathe with the changing angle of the rays. My mother paused her weaving to fan herself with a palm frond, the sound of the dry leaves, rustling a soft counterpoint to the silence. The heat began to break as the breeze picked up from the north, carrying the coolness of the sea and the promise of evening. I lay back on the woven mat, feeling the coolness of the reeds against my skin, and let my eyes drift shut as the sounds of the household settled into a peaceful rhythm. The world outside continued its slow, steady rotation, indifferent to the small life unfolding within these humble walls, yet that indifference felt like a kind of protection. The river flowed on, the reeds swayed, and the light faded gently into the deep blue of the approaching night, wrapping the small house in a blanket of twilight. I was born into a world already trembling with the weight of expectation. My father, Seti I, was a man of iron will, a warrior who sought to restore the glory that had faded during the turbulent years before him. From my earliest days, I was not merely a child of the royal house, but a vessel for the future of Egypt. My education was rigorous, a relentless immersion in the arts of war, the wisdom of the scribes, and the sacred duties of the priesthood. I learned to read the stars as easily as I learned to hold the bow. The temples of Karnak were my playground, their towering columns echoing with the whispers of priests and the chanting of hymns. I watched my father carve his name into the stone, his hands guiding the chisel with a precision that I aspired to master. The court was a place of constant motion, yet within its walls I found a stillness that only a child can perceive. The air inside the palace in Memphis always carried a specific scent, a mixture of cool stone, dried papyrus, and the faint, sweet aroma of lotus flowers kept in clay jars. My mother, Tuya, moved through these halls with a grace that belied her connection to the warrior class. She was the daughter of an officer, and her presence reminded me that strength and gentleness could exist in the same breath. I remember the texture of the linen robe she wore, rough yet soft against my skin as she guided my small hands in the art of writing. We sat on mats woven from reeds, the floor cool beneath us, as she taught me the first strokes of the hieroglyphs. The ink was black, made from soot and gum, and it stained my fingers for days, a badge of my growing understanding. There are no records of my first steps, no written account of the sound of my first laugh. The silence of the archives is a quiet space where my earliest years remain hidden from view. Historians look for dates and battles, but they do not find the small moments of a child's life. The birth of the prince was likely recorded in temple archives that have not survived to the present day. The post-weaning diets of individuals from this period have been studied, yet they reveal nothing of the royal family's private joys. The quest for more information continues, but the early years remain shrouded in the mists of time. I recall only the feeling of the sun on my face as I played in the gardens, the warmth of the stone walls, and the sound of my father's voice calling my name. My training began with the observation of the world around me. I learned to see the proportions of the human form with a steady and disciplined eye. The style of the period emphasized order, symmetry, and the eternal nature of the Pharaoh. I practiced drawing the sacred symbols that defined my divine authority. I learned to carve the cartouches that held my name with precise and deliberate strokes. The technique of carving required a patience that seemed unnatural for a boy of my age, but the repetition brought a deep sense of calm. I would spend hours in the quiet of the scriptorium, the light filtering through the high windows, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. The city of Pi Ramesses served as a summer palace under the reign of Seti I before becoming the capital. This transition marked a shift in the political center of the kingdom during the later years of the dynasty. I would have experienced this change as I grew, moving between the great cities of Memphis and Thebes according to the needs of the state. The landscape of the Delta provided a different environment from the arid lands of the South. It was a place of lush vegetation and abundant water from the Nile River. The family moved through these lands, and I watched the world change with every mile. The political climate of the time was one of consolidation and restoration after a period of instability. Seti I worked to restore the traditional order and the power of the priesthood. I grew up witnessing these efforts to strengthen the kingdom and its institutions. The absence of specific biographical details in the sources does not diminish the importance of my later achievements. Historians must rely on the general practices of the royal family to reconstruct my early years. The silence of the texts allows the imagination to fill the gaps with the known customs of the era. I lived a life of privilege and responsibility from my earliest days. I was groomed to succeed my father and to continue the work of my ancestors. The legacy of the 19th dynasty was being prepared in the quiet halls of the palace. I learned the rituals required to maintain the order of the universe known as Mat. The temple of Amun at Karnak stood as a central place of worship for the royal family. Priests guided me through the sacred ceremonies that defined the role of the pharaoh. Military training began at a young age, as the king was expected to lead his armies in battle. I learned to wield weapons and to understand the tactics of chariot warfare. These skills were vital for maintaining the stability of the empire against foreign threats. The sound of the chariot wheels on the sand, the clash of bronze on bronze, the shouting of commands, these were the sounds of my youth. Yet, even in the midst of such noise, there was a rhythm to the training, a pattern that brought a sense of order to the chaos of war. I learned to control my breathing, to steady my heart, to move with the grace of a predator and the discipline of a soldier. The great statue of Ramses Ii now rests in the Egyptian Museum, yet it once stood broken in the sands of time. It was discovered in 1820 at Mitrahina, near the ancient city of Memphis. The massive figure lay in 6 pieces, scattered across the ground for several decades. Workers found the stone fragments near the ruins of the temple, and they pieced the statue back together with care. This statue, though broken and scattered, stands today as a testament to the enduring nature of the Pharaoh. It reminds us that even in death, the name of the king remains. The stone is cold to the touch, but it holds the warmth of 1,000 years of history. The silence of the early records suggests that the focus of ancient historians was on the deeds of the adult king. They sought to record the battles, the building projects, the conquests, but not the quiet moments of childhood. I remember the feeling of the sun on my face, the sound of the river, the scent of the lotus flowers. These are the memories that remain, not the dates and the battles. The silence of the sources suggests that my skills were absorbed through the standard curriculum of the royal court. Young princes likely studied under master scribes and sculptors who guided their hands with patience. They learned to observe the proportions of the human form with a steady and disciplined eye. The style of the period emphasized order, symmetry, and the eternal nature of the Pharaoh. I learned to accept the inevitability of my own mortality with a sense of peaceful resignation. The final years of my life were spent in reflection and the consolidation of my legacy. I knew that my name would be remembered long after my physical form had returned to the earth. My spirit joined the ranks of the ancestors who watched over the land of Egypt. My life served as a testament to the power of enduring faith and duty. I remained a figure of stability until the very last moment of my existence. The great statue of Ramses Ii now rests in the Egyptian Museum, yet it once stood broken in the sands of time. It was discovered in 1820 at Mitrahina, near the ancient city of Memphis. The massive figure lay in 6 pieces, scattered across the ground for several decades. Workers found the stone fragments near the ruins of the temple, and the morning light arrived with a heavy, golden weight, pressing down upon the sandstone plains of Thebes. I stood before the great temple, feeling the coolness of the early air against skin that had known only the warmth of the palace. The stone beneath my sandals was rough and uneven, worn by thousands of feet that had walked this path before me. I remembered the silence of the night, the way the stars had watched without blinking as the world held its breath. Now the sun rose with a deliberate slowness, illuminating the faces of the gods carved into the cliffside. 4 colossal statues sat in a row, their heads turned toward the east, waiting for the first ray of light to touch their stone eyes. The first 3 faces glowed with a warm, inner fire as the sun climbed higher. The 4th statue, representing the god of the underworld, remained in deep shadow, a silent guardian of the dark. This deliberate placement was a choice made by the builders, a reminder that even a king must acknowledge the forces that lie beyond the light. I walked slowly toward the entrance, my hand trailing along the cool wall. The texture of the limestone was familiar, a language I had learned to read since childhood. Every scratch and chip told a story of the tools that shaped it, of the patience required to turn a mountain into a monument. The air smelled of dry earth and the faint, sweet scent of myrrh burning in the inner sanctum. It was a smell that had filled my nostrils during every ritual of my life, a scent that signaled the presence of the divine. The procession moved forward with a rhythmic grace, the footsteps of priests and soldiers echoing softly against the stone. I wore the double crown, its heavy gold and red felt pressing against my temples. It was a weight I had practiced carrying, a physical burden that mirrored the invisible weight of the kingdom. My heart beat steadily, a calm rhythm that matched the slow march of the crowd. I did not feel fear, only a deep, settled certainty that this moment had been prepared for since my birth. The priests chanted low and soft, their voices blending with the rustle of linen robes and the clinking of bronze ornaments. They carried the sacred bark, a small boat of cedar and gold, on their shoulders. The wood creaked gently under the load, a sound that spoke of the fragility of even the strongest things. We moved through the great hypostyle hall, where columns rose like forests of papyrus and lotus. The ceiling was lost in shadow, but the pillars were illuminated by torches that flickered in the draught. Their carved surfaces depicted scenes of my father and the gods, a visual history that stretched back to the first dynasties. I touched the smooth surface of a column as I passed, feeling the chisel marks that lay beneath the polish. These marks were the fingerprints of the artisans, a testament to the human hands that built the divine. The light from the torches danced across the reliefs, making the painted figures seem to move and breathe. It was an illusion of life that I had seen 1,000 times, yet it never failed to inspire a sense of awe. The coronation took place in the heart of the sanctuary, where the air was still and cool. A single beam of sunlight pierced the darkness, falling upon the altar where the crown of Upper Egypt rested. I approached the altar with slow, measured steps, my hands open and empty. The high priest stood beside me, his face serene, his eyes fixed on the crown. He spoke the words of the ritual, his voice clear and steady, echoing off the stone walls. I listened to every syllable, feeling the weight of the ancient words settle into my bones. They were not just sounds, but spells that bound the land and its people to the will of the gods. When the crown was placed upon my head, the weight was immense, a physical anchor that grounded me to the earth. I felt the cold gold against my skin, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the sun. The silence that followed was profound, a stillness that seemed to stretch into eternity. In that moment I was no longer just a man, but a vessel for the divine will, a living bridge between the mortal and the eternal. The priests bowed low, their foreheads touching the stone floor, and the crowd erupted in a low murmur of reverence. It was a sound of acceptance, a collective exhale that signaled the beginning of a new era. The years that followed were a blur of construction and ceremony, a relentless drive to leave a mark that would outlast the sands of time. I traveled to every corner of the land, from the delta in the north to the cataracts in the south. In each place I raised temples and obelisks, carving my name into the very bones of the earth. The stone was hard and unyielding, requiring the patience of a lifetime to shape. I watched as the quarries were opened, as the massive blocks were cut and dragged across the desert. The sound of the chisels was a constant rhythm, a song of creation that never ceased. The workers were skilled and dedicated, their hands calloused from the labor, their eyes bright with the vision of the future. They worked in teams, passing the heavy stones from hand to hand, a human chain that stretched across the landscape. The dust of the quarries settled on their skin, turning them gray, but they did not stop. They knew that they were building something that would endure long after their names were forgotten. I walked among them, feeling the heat of the sun and the dust in my throat. I saw the determination in their faces, a reflection of my own desire for immortality. The scale of these projects was vast, dwarfing the efforts of any ruler before me. I sought to fill the land with monuments that would speak to the future, a visual language that would be understood by generations yet unborn. The light within the sanctuary of Abu Simbel shifts slowly as the sun rises higher in the sky. Dust motes dance in the narrow beam of sunlight that penetrates the deep stone corridor. The air inside the temple is cool and still, smelling faintly of ancient limestone and dry earth. Shadows stretch long across the floor as the sun moves toward the back wall of the sanctum. The stone faces of the seated gods appear to glow with an inner warmth as the light touches them. Silence fills the vast chamber, broken only by the soft footsteps of distant visitors. The texture of the sandstone walls feels rough and cool under the touch of a gentle hand. Carved reliefs of battles and offerings stand frozen in time, their colors faded but their forms still distinct. The atmosphere is one of profound peace and quiet reverence for the ancient builders. Time seems to slow down within these sacred walls, allowing the mind to rest and wander. The interplay of light and shadow creates a meditative rhythm that soothes the weary spirit. I recall the campaign in the land of Kadesh, a moment that would define my reign in the eyes of the world. The art of the time captured the event as a great victory, a single king defeating a vast army. The walls of the temple show me standing alone, the enemy scattered before my chariot. The truth was more complex, a stalemate that required careful diplomacy to resolve. Yet, the stone does not speak of compromise, only of strength and dominance. I led 4 divisions of my army, each named after a god, moving in organized ranks across the desert. The division of Ammon was the first, followed by the division of Re, then Ptah, and finally the division of Set. They marched with a precision that was a work of art in itself, a display of order and discipline. The sand was hot beneath our feet, and the air shimmered with heat. We carried the standards of the gods, their colors bright against the pale sky. The memory of that day is etched in my mind, not as a battle, but as a performance of power. The artists captured the essence of the event, filtering out the chaos to present a vision of eternal stability. This approach ensured that my image remained timeless, a symbol of the unchanging nature of kingship. The influence of my father, Seti I, was evident in every stone I laid. He had established a standard of excellence that I strove to maintain and surpass. The workshops in Thebes produced works of such quality that they seemed to breathe with life. Artists traveled from distant provinces to contribute to the dust of Syria still rises in my mind, a fine, golden haze that coats the throat and clings to the eyelashes. I remember the heat of that afternoon, a physical weight that pressed down upon the shoulders of every man in the ranks. The air tasted of dry earth and the copper tang of fear, a flavor that lingers long after the battle has faded into history. We marched toward the city of Kadesh, a place that seemed to shimmer on the horizon like a mirage of stone. My heart beat a steady rhythm against my ribs, not with panic, but with the focused intensity of a man who knows his role in the great design. The 4 divisions moved as a single organism, a breathing entity of flesh and wood and bronze. The first division, named for the god Ammon, led the way with banners snapping in the hot wind. Their colors were bright against the pale landscape, a splash of red and white that cut through the monotony of the desert. I rode at the head of the second division, the one dedicated to Re, feeling the vibration of the chariot wheels beneath my feet. The horses were restless, their muscles tense under the leather harnesses, sensing the shift in the air before the enemy appeared. The silence of the march was broken only by the crunch of sand and the low murmur of commands passed down the line. I watched the soldiers, their faces set in masks of discipline, their eyes scanning the dunes for any sign of movement. We were far from the green banks of the Nile, deep in a land where the water was scarce and the sun was a relentless eye. The heat rose in waves from the ground, distorting the view of the distant hills. I recall the smell of the chariot grease, a heavy, oily scent that mixed with the sweat of the horses and men. It was a smell of preparation, of machinery waiting to be unleashed. The camp was set up with the precision of a ritual, tents raised in perfect rows, the perimeter marked by stakes driven deep into the earth. We believed we were safe, shielded by the strength of our numbers and the favor of the gods. The scouts returned with reports of the Hittite army, but their words were twisted by the fog of war and the desire for a simple story. They spoke of a distant force, of a king who was far away, of a threat that was not yet immediate. The trap was sprung before the sun reached its zenith. The Hittite chariots emerged from the cover of the river, a sudden storm of bronze and wood that crashed into the flank of the Ammon division. The ground shook under the weight of thousands of wheels, a sound like rolling thunder that drowned out the cries of men. I saw the chaos unfold with a clarity that felt detached, as if I were watching a play from a high balcony. The lines of the army broke, the orderly ranks dissolving into a swirl of dust and panic. Horses screamed as they were struck, their bodies collapsing in the sand. The air filled with the whine of arrows and the clash of metal on metal. I felt the heat of the battle, the physical proximity of death that pressed close to my skin. My hands gripped the reins of my chariot, my knuckles white against the leather. The horses reared, their hooves striking the ground in a frantic rhythm. I shouted orders, my voice lost in the roar of the conflict, but I felt the weight of the moment settle onto my shoulders. In that moment of confusion, the world narrowed down to the space between my chariot and the enemy. I saw the Hittite warriors, their faces obscured by helmets, their eyes cold and focused. They moved with a speed that was terrifying, their chariots weaving through the scattered ranks of my men. The dust was so thick that I could barely see the ground beneath me, only the shapes of men and horses emerging from the brown cloud. I remembered the training, the drills that had prepared me for this exact moment. I drove my chariot forward, cutting through the line of the enemy, my spear finding its mark in the space between armor plates. The impact was jarring, a shock that traveled up my arm and into my chest. I did not feel fear then, only a cold, calculating clarity. I saw the division of Re arriving, the sun god's banner rising above the dust. They charged into the fray, their arrival turning the tide of the battle. The Hittite chariots, overextended and separated from their infantry, found themselves trapped in the open. The battle raged for hours, the sun climbing higher and the heat becoming unbearable. The ground was littered with the debris of war, broken chariot wheels, shattered shields, and the still forms of men who had fallen. I moved through the chaos, rallying my troops, my voice a steady anchor in the storm. The division of Petau arrived, bringing fresh strength to the exhausted ranks. They formed a wall of shields, a barrier that stopped the Hittite advance. The fighting became a grinding struggle, a test of endurance and will. The dust settled slowly, revealing the aftermath of the clash. The silence returned, heavy and profound, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the lowing of the horses. It was a stalemate, a pause in the violence that would define the rest of my reign. The walls of the temples would later tell a different story, one of a glorious victory and a single-handed triumph. The carvings would show me standing tall, my spear raised, the enemy cowering at my feet. The stone would capture a moment of perfection that never truly existed in the dust of that field. The art of the time demanded a narrative of absolute power, a reflection of the divine order that governed the world. I watched the sculptors work, their chisels striking the stone with a rhythmic precision that mirrored the beat of a drum. They carved the scene of the battle, but they erased the confusion, the fear, and the uncertainty. The figures were idealized, their muscles perfect, their expressions calm and untroubled. The Hittite king was depicted as a defeated foe, his head bowed in submission, though in truth he had held his ground. The story was told in stone, a permanent record of a victory that was more symbolic than real. The technique of relief carving required a deep understanding of the material, a sense of how light and shadow would play across the surface. The artists used copper tools to shape the hard limestone, removing layers of stone with deliberate strokes. The influence of my father was evident in the quality of the work, a standard of excellence that had been established long before I took the throne. The peace that followed was a quiet thing, a shift in the winds that brought stability to the northern borders. It was not a sudden event, but a slow unfolding of diplomacy and negotiation. The treaty that was signed between us and the Hittite king was a document of rare clarity, a text that survived the centuries. It was the oldest known peace agreement in human history, a testament to the power of words over weapons. The text did not mention the battle, but focused instead on the future, on mutual defense and the flow of trade. It was an agreement that recognized the strength of both empires, a balance of power that would last for generations. The Hittite king sent a princess to be my wife, a union that sealed the peace with the bond of family. She arrived in the palace, her face veiled, her presence a symbol of the new era. The gifts of gold and silver were brought in, shining in the light of the great hall. The court was filled with a sense of relief, the tension of the past decades dissolving into the air. The years that followed were a time of building, of creating works that would outlast the stone and the sand. I commissioned statues that were larger than life, figures that dominated the landscape and reminded the people of the power of the throne. The cliffs at Abu Simbel were carved with my likeness, the face of the king staring out over the valley. The technique involved deep undercutting to create shadows that changed with the movement of the sun, a play of light that gave the stone a sense of life. The face was rendered with a serene expression, a mask of calm that hid the struggles of the man beneath. The style avoided individual quirks, focusing instead on an idealized representation of kingship that was timeless and unchanging. The influence of the workshops in Thebes was evident in every detail, a quality of work that matched the grandeur of the capital. Artists traveled from distant provinces to contribute to these massive projects, bringing their skills and their vision to the work. The legacy of these campaigns was not just in the battles fought, but in the peace that was forged. The world shifted from open warfare to a period of cooperation, a time when art and architecture flourished. The Nile Valley became a center of creativity, a place where the gods were honored and the people were fed. I walked through the temples, my hand tracing the carvings that told the story of my life. The silence of the halls was a comfort, a space where the noise of the world could be left behind. The carvings of the Pharaoh and his family remained clear and sharp, defying the erosion of time. The silence continued to fill the vast spaces, offering a sense of peace and eternal order. The temple stood as a testament to a life lived in the shadow of the gods, a life of duty and service. The story was written in stone, a record of a man who sought to build a world that would last forever. The sun moved slowly across the sky outside, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor of the chamber. The dust motes danced in the beams of light, a silent celebration of the passage of time. The air was still, heavy with the scent of incense and the dry dust of the archives. I sat in the quiet, watching the light shift, feeling the weight of the years settle upon my shoulders. The Battle of Kadesh was a distant memory, a moment in the long river of time that had flowed since before The dust of the northern roads still settles in the memory of my bones, a fine grit that no amount of washing can truly remove from the skin. I recall the heat of that summer when the riverbed of the Orontes ran dry in places, revealing the cracked earth beneath the shallow waters. My army moved in 4 distinct streams, each named for a god who watched over a different aspect of life and war. The division of Ammon led the way, its banners snapping in the hot wind as I crossed the river with the first light of dawn. Behind them followed the division of Re, then the division of Ptah, and finally the division of Seth bringing up the rear. We marched with a rhythm that felt eternal, a steady pounding of sandals against the dry earth that echoed the heartbeat of the land itself. The city of Kadesh rose before us like a fortress built by giants, its walls towering over the plain. I had separated from the main body of the army, believing the intelligence I received was sound. The scouts spoke of a Hittite force far to the north, far away from the gates of this city. They told me the enemy was scattered, confused, and easy to defeat. I felt a surge of confidence, a lightness in my chest that made the heavy bronze of my armor feel like nothing more than a second skin. The air smelled of dry grass and the metallic tang of the river. I rode forward with a small guard, eager to reach the city and secure the victory that seemed so close. The silence of the valley was deceptive. It was not the silence of peace, but the held breath of a trap springing shut. From the northwest side of the city, the Hittite chariots emerged from the shadows of the hills. They had been concealed there, waiting for the moment when I was most vulnerable. They were separated from their own main force, just as I was separated from mine. The ground shook as hundreds of wheels tore through the dust, a sound like a great storm rolling in from the sea. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird seeking escape from a cage of bone. I saw the flash of bronze blades in the sunlight, a blinding array of steel that seemed to stretch to the horizon. I did not flee. To flee would be to break the order of the world, to invite chaos into the heart of the kingdom. I gathered my remaining guards and turned to face the charge. The clash was deafening, a cacophony of shouting men and screaming horses that drowned out the sound of the river. Chariots collided, splintering wood and shattering shields in a spray of dust and blood. I fought with a clarity that cut through the fog of war, every movement precise and deliberate. I called out the names of my gods, asking for their strength to hold the line. The division of Ammon was far behind, but the spirit of the god was with me in that moment. I rallied the troops, my voice cutting through the din, urging them to stand firm against the tide of the enemy. The battle was fierce and long, a struggle that stretched from the heat of midday into the cooling shadows of the afternoon. The Hittites pushed hard, their chariots relentless, but they could not break our resolve. We held the ground inch by bloody inch until the main body of the army finally arrived. The division of Re and the others came crashing in from the flanks, turning the tide of the engagement. The enemy retreated, their formation broken, their chariots fleeing back toward the city. The dust settled slowly, revealing the aftermath of the struggle. Bodies lay scattered across the plain, a grim testament to the cost of ambition. In the years that followed, the story of that day was carved into the stone of every great temple in the land. The inscriptions told a tale of a decisive victory, of a Pharaoh who stood alone against an army of thousands and emerged triumphant. They spoke of my courage and the favor of the gods, transforming a tactical draw into a legend that would endure for millennia. I watched as the scribes wrote these words, their reed pens scratching against the papyrus, capturing the essence of the event in a way that served the needs of the state. The truth of the stalemate was buried beneath layers of grandeur, hidden in the shadow of the narrative that the people needed to believe. Peace eventually came, not through the sword, but through the pen. The years of conflict had drained the resources of both empires, leaving them weary and ready for a new path. A treaty was forged, a document that would bind the two great powers in an alliance of mutual respect and non-aggression. It was written in two languages, the flowing hieroglyphs of Egypt and the wedge-shaped cuneiform of the Hittites, ensuring that both sides could read and understand the terms of the agreement. The text spoke of brotherhood and the end of hostilities, a promise that the weapons of war would be laid down for good. One version of this historic pact was carved into the walls of the great temple at Karnak within the sacred precinct of Amun-Re. The stone was cool to the touch, the glyphs deep and precise, meant to last for eternity. The other version was sent to the Hittite capital, where it was kept in a temple of their own, a mirror of the one in Egypt. This document survived the fall of empires and the rise of new kings, a silent witness to the power of diplomacy. Centuries later, an archaeologist named Hugo Winkler would discover the clay tablets of the Hittite version in the ruins of their ancient city. He would bring them back to the world, a testament to the sophistication of our political maneuvering in those distant times. The peace that followed was sealed with a marriage that bound the two houses together. I took a Hittite princess as my wife, a woman of grace and dignity who brought with her the blessings of her people. Her arrival in the palace was a celebration, a time of music and feasting that marked the end of decades of strife. The northern borders were secure, and the flow of resources between the nations resumed. Gold and silver arrived from the Hittite court, gifts of friendship that adorned the temples and the treasury. The air in the palace was filled with the scent of incense and the sound of laughter, a stark contrast to the dust and blood of the battlefields. I corresponded regularly with the kings of Babylon and Assyria, maintaining a delicate balance of power in the region. Letters were written on clay tablets and papyrus scrolls, carried by messengers who traversed the vast distances between the great capitals. These exchanges were recorded with care, each word chosen to maintain the respect and authority of the Pharaoh. The world was a complex web of alliances and rivalries, and I navigated it with a steady hand. Rivals who challenged my authority were dealt with swiftly, their threats neutralized before they could take root. Disloyal officials were removed from their posts, replaced by men who had proven their loyalty over many years of service. The internal stability of the kingdom allowed for a focus on great works of stone and art. The temple at Abu Simbel rose from the desert sands, a monument to my power and the favor of the gods. 4 colossal statues sat at the entrance, representing myself and the great deities of the pantheon. The statues of Amun, Ra-Horakhti, and myself were bathed in the light of the sun, while the statue of Ptah, the god of the underworld, remained in the shadows. This precise engineering feat was a marvel of the age, a demonstration of the advanced knowledge possessed by my architects. The temple was designed so that twice a year, on the 22nd of October and the 22nd of February, the rising sun would penetrate the sanctuary and illuminate the faces of 3 of the 4 statues. Visitors flocked to the temple to witness this unique phenomenon, a moment where the heavens seemed to touch the earth. The light would slowly creep across the floor, touching the stone faces with a golden glow that seemed to breathe life into the statues. It was a meditative experience, a reminder of the cyclical nature of time and the enduring presence of the divine. The interplay of light and shadow created a rhythm that soothed the weary spirit, a visual hymn to the order of the cosmos. The great hypostyle hall was modified during my reign, its walls covered in new reliefs and inscriptions that told the stories of my victories and the peace I had forged. The architect Kamwaset played a significant role in these works, restoring older monuments and ensuring that the legacy of the past was preserved alongside the achievements of the present. The political environment remained stable, allowing the Egyptian state to focus on internal development and cultural achievements. The era was marked by a balance of military strength and diplomatic sophistication, a time when the pharaoh could rule with the confidence of a man who had secured his place in history. The narrative of my life is built upon the foundation of these surviving inscriptions and treaties. Each fragment, the dust of the Levant settled slowly on the boots of the returning soldiers, a fine red powder that stained the white linen of the uniforms. I walked through the gates of the city not as a conqueror seeking new blood, but as a builder seeking new stone. The wars had ended, the treaties signed with a seal that pressed deep into the clay of the tablets. Peace was a heavy thing, heavier than any shield, yet it allowed the hands to turn from the sword to the chisel. I watched the scribes record the terms of the agreement, their reed pens scratching softly against the papyrus, a sound like dry grass shifting in the wind. The Hittite princess walked beside me, her veil fluttering in the warm breeze, a symbol of the union that held the northern borders firm. We did not speak of the battles fought in the mud of Kadesh, but of the temples that would rise where the blood had once flowed. The empire breathed easier now, the tension in the shoulders of the governors easing as the trade routes opened wide again. Gold flowed from the south heavy and bright, filling the storehouses that lined the riverbanks. Timber from the distant cedar forests arrived on ships that creaked in the harbor, their masts towering over the workers who unloaded the heavy beams. These materials were not for war, but for the great works that would outlast the flesh of men. I walked through the workshops where the stonecutters worked, their hammers striking in a rhythmic cadence that matched the beating of my own heart. The air smelled of wet limestone and the sharp tang of copper tools, a scent that promised permanence. A large statue of a seated figure sat in the shadows of the unfinished hall, its features worn smooth by the hands of the sculptors. The stone surface felt cool and solid under the touch of a wandering hand, rough in some places where the chisel had slipped, smooth in others where the polish was nearly complete. Dust motes danced slowly in the single beam of light that pierced the high, narrow window, illuminating the tiny specks of stone that floated in the air. The silence of the room was profound, broken only by the distant, rhythmic sound of wind moving through the valley and the occasional murmur of a worker outside. The heavy wooden doors stood closed, keeping the heat of the day at bay, preserving the coolness of the interior. Shadows lengthened slowly as the sun moved across the sky outside the thick stone walls, casting long, dark fingers across the floor. The stillness of the room offered a sense of profound peace and timeless quiet, a moment where the world seemed to hold its breath. The scent of dried myrrh and cool limestone from the walls surrounding the space filled the lungs, a reminder of the sacred nature of the work being done. The administration of the land required a mind that never rested, even when the body sought sleep. Local governors and priests managed the daily affairs of the provinces under the watchful eye of the throne, their reports arriving on the backs of runners who raced across the desert. I read the scrolls by the light of oil lamps, the ink still wet on some, the edges of the papyrus curling in the dry heat. The economy thrived on the surplus of the harvest, the granaries overflowing with grain that fed the workers and the soldiers alike. And tribute from the vassal states in the Levant arrived in caravans laden with silver, copper, and exotic woods that had never seen the sun of Egypt. This wealth was not hoarded, but poured into the earth to raise monuments that would touch the sky. The cultural atmosphere was one of confidence and self-assurance, a belief that the king was not merely a man, but a god walking among men. I projected an image of invincibility, a facade that reinforced my authority over subjects and enemies alike, even as the years passed and the hair on my head turned white. The legacy of this reign would endure long after the death of the flesh, written in stone that would not crumble. Historical records from the period provide limited, specific details about the personal life of the pharaoh, leaving gaps that the imagination must fill. Some sources fail to mention the exact year of accession or the precise duration of the early rule, the ink having faded or the papyrus having rotted away. Other texts do not contain information regarding the sons or the immediate family lineage, the names lost to the silence of the ages. Scientific analysis of DNA from the era has not yielded specific data about the family members, the bones having been disturbed or the seals having been broken. Inscriptions in the Valley of the Kings do not always identify the specific tombs of the many children, their names erased by time or by the hands of those who came after. The absence of certain details in modern texts highlights the gaps in our current historical knowledge, leaving the intimate moments of the life hidden in the dark. Despite these omissions, the broader context of the reign is well established through military and diplomatic records that speak of strength and stability. The great hypostyle hall and other architectural feats stand as testaments to power and vision, their columns rising like a forest of stone. The architect Khaimweset played a significant role in restoring older monuments during this prosperous time, ensuring that the past was not forgotten but honored. The political environment remained relatively stable after the treaty with the Hittites was signed, allowing the state to focus on internal development and cultural achievements. The era was marked by a balance of military strength and diplomatic sophistication, a tightrope walk that required constant attention. I navigated these complex international relations with skill and strategic foresight, ensuring that the borders remained secure and the trade routes open. The reign set a standard for future pharaohs who sought to emulate the grandeur and success of this time. The historical record continues to be refined as new evidence emerges from archaeological excavations, each discovery adding a small piece to the larger puzzle. Scholars remain cautious about drawing definitive conclusions where the evidence is incomplete or ambiguous, respecting the silence of the past. The narrative of the life is built upon the foundation of these surviving inscriptions and treaties, each fragment of text adding to the story. The story of the reign is one of endurance, adaptation, and lasting legacy in the ancient world. The light within the sanctuary of Abu Simbel shifts slowly as the sun rises higher in the sky, a celestial clock that measures the passage of time. Dust motes dance in the narrow beam of sunlight that penetrates the deep stone corridor, illuminating the ancient carvings on the walls. The air inside the temple is cool and still, smelling faintly of ancient limestone and dry earth, a scent that has remained unchanged for millennia. Shadows stretch long across the floor as the sun moves toward the back wall of the sanctum, casting the statues in a golden glow. The stone faces of the seated gods appear to glow with an inner warmth as the light touches them, their eyes seeming to follow the movement of the sun. Silence fills the vast chamber, broken only by the soft footsteps of distant visitors who tread lightly on the stone. The texture of the sandstone walls feels rough and cool under the touch of a gentle hand, a connection to the hands that carved them long ago. Carved reliefs of battles and offerings stand frozen in time, their colors faded but their forms still distinct, telling stories of a world that is gone. The atmosphere is one of profound peace and quiet reverence for the ancient builders who sought to capture eternity in stone. Time seems to slow down within these sacred walls, allowing the mind to rest and wander through the corridors of history. The interplay of light and shadow creates a meditative rhythm that soothes the weary spirit, a lullaby of stone and sun. The pharaoh maintained a demeanor of calm authority throughout the long years of rule, a stillness that commanded respect without the need for shouting. He possessed a personality that blended paternal warmth with an unyielding sense of royal duty, a balance that held the kingdom together. The daily habits reflected a deep devotion to the gods and the maintenance of cosmic order, a rhythm that began before dawn. He rose before the sun to perform the sacred rituals required by the temple priests, washing and dressing with care and precision. These morning ceremonies involved the careful washing and dressing of the statues, an act of service that renewed the bond between the divine and the mortal. The sun alignment at the temple of Abu Simbel occurs twice a year, on October 22nd and February 22nd, when the light penetrates the deep sanctuary. During this alignment, sunlight illuminates 3 of the 4 statues inside the temple's sanctum, leaving the 4th in shadow. The 4th statue of Ptah remains in shadow, symbolizing the god of the underworld, a reminder of the cycle of life and death. These facts collectively illustrate the breadth and depth of the monumental legacy, a testament to the power of the sun and the stone. The king maintained a complex web of relationships that defined the long reign over the two lands of Egypt, a network of loyalty and duty. The earliest patrons included the divine household of the father Seti I, who prepared the young prince for royal duties with strict discipline. The king relied heavily on the father's architects and scribes to continue the monumental building projects begun in the north, expanding the temple complexes with new halls. These collaborators worked tirelessly to expand the temple complexes at Karnak and Luxor with new hypostyle halls, their hands moving with speed and skill. The artisans carved intricate reliefs that celebrated the lineage and the divine right to rule the world, their chisels finding the sun set on the 66th year of my rule as the land of Egypt mourned its great king. My breath grew shallow in the cool air of the inner chamber, a soft rhythm that matched the slow turning of the seasons outside. The body had carried the weight of the crown for so long that the bones felt heavy, yet the spirit remained light and ready for the journey. I did not fear the end, for I had spent a lifetime preparing for this specific moment. The priests moved with a quiet reverence, their hands gentle as they prepared the sacred oils and the linen bandages. Every movement was a prayer, every gesture a step toward the eternal life that awaited beyond the western horizon. The wrapping of the linen was done with a precision that honored the gods, layer upon layer of white cloth that would hold my form for eternity. Small amulets and protective charms were placed within these folds to guard against any spiritual harm in the dark. The heart was weighed against the feather of truth to determine if I was worthy of the fields of reeds. It was a moment of absolute silence, where the only sound was the soft rustle of the fabric and the breathing of those who served. My body was then placed within a series of nested coffins made of cedar and gold, each one inscribed with spells from the Book of the Dead to guide the spirit through the underworld. The final resting place was prepared in the Valley of the Kings with great secrecy and care, hidden deep within the rock to protect me from grave robbers and the passage of time. The silence of the tomb marked the end of my earthly reign and the beginning of my eternal journey into the unknown. The room felt deep and protective, wrapping around the visitor like a warm blanket. Shadows lengthened slowly as the sun moved across the sky, marking the passage of time without urgency. The stillness of the space invited a state of quiet contemplation and deep, restful thought. Dust motes danced in the beams of light that filtered through the high windows, illuminating the ancient limestone blocks with a soft golden glow. A single statue stood in the center of the room, bathed in a warm light that seemed to come from within the stone itself. Its carved features showed a serene expression, the face of a king who ruled with confidence and calm. The texture of the stone was rough in some places and smooth in others, telling a story of hands that had chiseled and polished for decades. The air felt still and heavy with the weight of 3,000 years of history, yet it was a peaceful heaviness like the deep water of the Nile. My son Merneptah ascended to the throne to continue the work of my father, and the transition of power was smooth despite the immense weight of the legacy I left behind. The empire remained strong and prosperous under the guidance of the new ruler, who faced the challenge of maintaining the stability that had been built over a lifetime. The memory of my reign persisted in the hearts of the people for many generations, invoked in prayers and inscribed on the walls of temples throughout the land. The stone statues that bore my likeness continued to stand guard over the Nile Valley, watching over the fields and the cities with a stoic and timeless presence. The wind moved gently through the columns of the great temples I had constructed, carrying the scent of incense and the sound of distant hymns. Dust settled softly upon the hieroglyphs that told the story of my rule, preserving the words for those who would come after. The light of the moon illuminated the desert sands that surrounded my final resting place, casting long shadows that stretched across the valley floor. The stars above the valley seemed to align with the ancient constellations of the sky, a celestial map that guided the soul on its journey. The river Nile flowed steadily past the ruins of my capital city of Pi, Ramses, its waters carrying the sediment of ages. Archaeologists later found broken stonework at Tanis that they initially mistook for the true capital. They eventually realized that the massive structures there were moved from their original location, a testament to the enduring nature of the monuments I had raised. The sheer number of my statues and temples ensured that my name remained known to history, appearing on countless objects found throughout the Nile Valley and surrounding regions. Many later pharaohs sought to emulate my style of building and my military campaigns, seeking to capture the same sense of stability and power. The critical reception of my work has remained largely positive throughout the modern era, with historians viewing my long reign as a period of stability and artistic achievement. Some modern interpretations focus on the propaganda inherent in my many inscriptions and reliefs, noting how the texts often exaggerated my victories to project an image of invincibility. Despite these exaggerations, the ability to maintain power for over 60 years remains impressive, a feat that few have matched in the long history of human rule. The modern significance of my legacy lies in my enduring presence in popular culture, where films and books frequently depict me as a powerful and sometimes tyrannical figure. Yet the archaeological record shows ruler who also valued diplomacy and trade, forging peace treaties and building bridges between nations. The careful preservation of my mummy allows scientists to learn more about my health, revealing that the natural process of aging was the primary factor in my eventual death. Modern examinations of my remains have failed to pinpoint a specific medical cause, confirming that I lived a full life that spanned nearly 3 times the average length of life for a person in ancient Egypt. This remarkable longevity allowed me to witness the rise and fall of many generations within my own court, a rare gift that shaped my perspective on the fleeting nature of power. The quiet halls of museums now hold the artifacts of my once mighty empire, where visitors walk slowly past the stone, faces that have watched over Egypt for millennia. The light filters softly through the high windows of the great museum halls, illuminating the ancient objects with a gentle, respectful glow. The cycle of history turns slowly, yet my memory remains fixed in the present day, a constant presence in the story of the world. My story continues to unfold through the careful study of my monuments and my mummy, revealing new truths with each passing year. The world remembers me not just as a conqueror, but as a builder of great works, a man who sought to leave a mark that would last forever. The silence of the room invites a deep and peaceful contemplation of the past, where the boundaries between the living and the dead seem to blur. The legacy of my reign rests quietly in these halls, waiting for those who seek it with an open heart and a curious mind. The stars above continue to shine, just as they did when I first looked up at the sky as a young boy, and the river flows on, carrying the memories of all who have walked this earth. The sun set on the 66th year of my rule as the land mourned its great king. Yet the silence that followed was not an end but a transformation. My body was prepared with a precision that defied the decay of time, wrapped in linen bandages that held the scent of myrrh and the weight of sacred amulets. Priests placed protective charms within the layers to guard against any spiritual harm, ensuring the heart would be weighed against the feather of truth without fear. I was placed within nested coffins of cedar and gold, inscribed with spells to guide the spirit through the darkness. The tomb was sealed in the Valley of the Kings, hidden from grave robbers and the relentless passage of years. That final sealing marked the end of an earthly reign, but the beginning of an eternal journey into the next world. My son Merneptah ascended the throne to continue the work I had built, facing the immense task of maintaining the stability I had forged. The empire remained strong under his guidance, though the void I left was vast. My name was invoked in prayers and carved into the walls of temples throughout the land, a constant reminder of the peace I had secured. The stone statues that bore my likeness continued to stand guard over the Nile Valley, watching the fields and cities with a stoic, timeless presence. The wind moved gently through the columns of the great temples I had constructed, carrying the dust that settled softly upon the hieroglyphs telling the story of my reign. The moon illuminated the desert sands surrounding my final resting place, while the stars above seemed to align with ancient constellations that had watched over Egypt for millennia. The river Nile flowed steadily past the ruins of my capital city, Pyrameses, a testament to the power I once held. Centuries later, archaeologists found broken stonework at Tanis that they initially mistook for the true capital, a confusion born of the shifting sands of time. They eventually realized that the massive structures there were merely fragments of a greater whole, moved by the forces of nature and the hands of later rulers. Even in this distant future, scholars study my reign to understand the complexities of ancient governance, finding in my inscriptions a blend of diplomacy and military might. The critical reception of my work has remained largely positive, viewed as a period of stability and artistic achievement. Some modern interpretations focus on the propaganda inherent in my many reliefs, noting how the texts exaggerated victories to project an image of invincibility. Yet, despite these exaggerations, the ability to maintain power for over 60 years remains a feat that commands respect. The modern significance of my legacy lies in an enduring presence within popular culture, where films and books depict me as a powerful, sometimes tyrannical figure. The archaeological record, however, reveals a ruler who also valued trade and the quiet strength of peace. The careful preservation of my mummy allows scientists to learn more about my health and the life I lived. This preservation ensures that future generations can continue to study my bones and the world I shaped. The quiet halls of museums now hold the artifacts of my once mighty empire, where visitors walk slowly past stone faces that have watched over Egypt for thousands of years. The light filters softly through high windows, illuminating ancient limestone blocks that have withstood the erosion of ages. Dust motes dance in the beams of sunlight, drifting without purpose or haste. A single statue stands in the center of the room, bathed in a warm glow, its carved features showing the serene expression of a king who ruled with confidence. The texture of the stone is rough in some places and smooth in others, bearing the marks of chisels and the gentle touch of centuries of wind. Shadows stretch across the floor as the sun moves slowly across the sky outside, casting long lines of darkness over the polished stone. The silence of the room invites deep and peaceful contemplation of the past, a space where the noise of the modern world fades away. The legacy of my rule rests quietly in these halls, waiting for those who seek it with open hearts. My story continues to unfold through the careful study of my monuments and my mummy, revealing layers of truth that were hidden for millennia. The world remembers me not just as a conqueror, but as a builder of great works that still stand today. My name remains etched in stone and in the minds of people everywhere, a fixed point in the turning cycle of history. The art of this period remains primary source for understanding ancient Egyptian culture, providing a window into the beliefs and values of a distant civilization. The silence of the early biographical texts is filled by the voice of the stone, which speaks of a king who sought to make his name eternal through art. Every element of the design was chosen to convey a specific meaning, from the smooth surfaces of the granite to the precision of the inscriptions. The artistic development of my reign was rooted in tradition, yet marked by an ambition to surpass my predecessors in the scale and scope of projects. I sought to create a grandeur that would outlast the mountains themselves. One specific fact remains clear in the record of my later years. My mummy was found to have suffered from severe dental abscesses and arthritis, conditions that caused significant pain in my final days. This physical reality contrasts with the image of the invincible God, king presented on the temple walls, yet it does not diminish the strength of my spirit. The pain was real, the body was frail, but the legacy remained unbroken. The world continues to turn, and my memory endures in the quiet contemplation of those who walk these halls. The sun sets slowly over the Valley of the Kings, casting long shadows across the sand as the air grows cool and still. A single statue stands guard at the entrance to a tomb, its face turned toward the horizon, watching the stars emerge one by one. The stone feels cool to the touch, holding the memory of the desert, night, and the warmth of the day. The landscape outside is vast and empty, stretching out to the distant mountains where the Nile flows quietly in the distance. The world seems to hold its breath in this moment of perfect stillness, a pause in the endless flow of time where the past and present meet. My story is complete, resting in the silence that I once ruled, now shared by all who come